Thank you for inviting me. Tonight, we will be talking about the environment. We all need to consider what our actions and how they affect the environment, and hopefully know something about how we can restore it. But tonight, we're going to have a very specific presentation on the environment, directed specifically to our urban gardens and green spaces, and how, in the face of a changing climate, we can improve the current environment. So Vista Gardens is a botanical garden I created and developed for the past 26 years here in Bremerton, just a few blocks away. This garden is now a nonprofit garden that's open to the general public for enjoyment, inspiration, and education that primarily focuses on the development of sustainable landscapes. This living laboratory has given me the opportunity to identify plants that thrive in the face of a changing climate. So these are shots of the garden per se. So right here in our gardens, we are witnessing a changing climate unfold in real time. As a result, many of you should recognize that blooms are arriving several weeks earlier. We have more extended drought periods in the summer. And most of you should remember the 2021 heat dome we had with approximately 108 degrees. And this past January of 2024, we also had a cold spell that was quite damaging, that preceded a very mild fall and early winter. So we need to adapt to this reality, but also help reshape it. And that's the focus of my presentation today. So we have a number of powerful tools to help create resilient gardens. The number one is water efficient practices. Two, regenerative soil care. And three, to me, the most exciting and fun part is selecting climate smart plants. And with all those three, we have the ability to develop resilient, biodiverse landscapes. But the foundation of resilient landscapes, of course, you start with water and soil management. As you know, water is a precious resource here in Washington. We have now lower snowpacks, drier and longer summers, and a growing population. And these put stresses on our water resources and enough water particularly for farmers and fish. So in order to have you need efficient irrigation to minimize potable water use. Part of the approach could be smart controllers, low flow heads, and drip irrigation, which puts water to the plant roots where you need them and substantially reduces water loss through evaporation. Another approach for managing water is hydrozoning. This means grouping plants with similar water needs, but also similar sun and soil requirements. If you group plants in a hydrozone, you reduce the plant stress because they have consistent water targeted specifically to their specific requirements. And as a result, they have reduced not only drought stress, but also reduced stress from overwatering. As a consequence, we have healthier plants, less maintenance, and less chemical synthetic inputs. So I just want to briefly show you two examples. One hydrozone in Vista Gardens is moderate watering, 30 minutes per week, in the John Lentz Garden, which was designed to house a group of unique rhododendrons. So it's primarily a shade garden. In contrast, we have the hydrozone that requires no supplemental water once plants are established, called the redwood sanctuary. And that contains many very drought-tolerant plants, such as lavender cotton, many lavenders, dwarf conifers, and many other herbs and drought-tolerant shrubs, some from Australia and New Zealand. And the point is that it's a beautiful garden, so you don't have to sacrifice beauty, even though you don't water the plants in the summertime. So if we convert one area of garden to a water-wise garden that doesn't require supplemental water, you have the advantage of lowering your water bill substantially. Now, another very important approach to managing water is to capture and manage stormwater. Why is this important? Well, it's a way of minimizing having pollutants go down to the sound or our other waterways. Every year in Kitsap, we have sewage going into the waterways. As a consequence, we have algae blooms and unsafe water. So this approach of managing stormwater throughout the county would go a long way in minimizing pollutants to the Puget Sound. We also need permeable surfaces in our gardens to help infiltrate water and minimize stormwater going to storm drains. So we want our landscapes to function as living filters. As the water goes through the soil, the plant roots and the microbes in the soil help remove those pollutants. So there's two features that we can use to help this process. One is a rain garden, which captures and infiltrates gardens. This is a photo of one with the plants in the bottom are native plants. One with the big leaves is one called Dermera petalta, and the other one is checker bloom. And these help when the rain goes into this slight depression, the plants and soil helps absorb the pollutants before they go down to the other waterways. Mention one more, a vegetative swell is a gentle channel filled with a mixture of plants that helps slow the water, stormwater, and filter the runoff as it comes from the rooftops and driveways in our region. This also helps, again, minimize pollutants going to our waterways. Now, maintenance also is important, plays an important role in minimizing pollutants. You can avoid synthetic fertilizers. Most gardeners today in this Pacific region actually use too much fertilizer. And as a consequence, we have nutrients going to our waterways in Puget Sound. So the best thing is to avoid synthetic fertilizers. Here at Vista Gardens, we use no synthetic fertilizers. We not need it. We use a extensive use of compost and arbor chips to provide the nutrients to the plants with the help of the microorganisms in the soil. So healthy landscapes can help keep water and soil in balance. Now, no matter how good irrigation system you have, it's not going to do much good unless you have healthy soil that's water retentive and also has reasonable drainage. So it's also key to have healthy soil to go along. So the next example we want to talk about is how do we regenerate soil management. We have very limited time, but the key thing is to ask yourself, what kind of soil do I have? And then you can answer the questions, what deficiencies and what you need to do. So the first thing is to determine soil texture, and that relates to the amount of sand, silt, and clay in your soil. And those properties are very important to determine how much water your soil will hold and what kind of drainage it's had, etc. And then I recommend that most people who don't know their soils should do a professional soil test to determine their soil quality. You can also improve soil by adding organic matter. Generally, organic matter improves soil structure and improves water infiltration, and also can improve drainage, particularly for clay soils. And you may also want to add beneficial microbes such as mycorrhizae. It's also important to understand microclimates. So when you want to plant something, you pick out a plant, you should know what its culture requirements are, and then what are the nature of the soil and conditions. Like this, what's the topography? How does it drain? How much moisture does soil hold? And how much sun that particular spot gets, and the different seasons. So a key part of gardening is to match microclimate to the plant's culture requirements. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't know their microclimates in their garden very well. And even more importantly, is they don't find out what the culture requirements are. So those are really key principles to find out to do a better job in gardening. So just to review, basically, hydrozoning was one approach to deliver water efficiently. We want to capture and infiltrate stormwater to minimize pollutants, and we want to build healthy soil. And of course, before you plant, you want to determine your microclimates. Now we're going to the fun part, I think, and it's very key, is to have proper plant selection, particularly in the face of a changing climate. So what's good and works 20 years ago may not be ideal for today. So we have 3 different types of plants for our plant pellet. We can plant natives, near natives, which are close to our region, but may not be native specifically to this ecotype, and then non-natives. And we want to select plants that for a specific function and to give the garden biodiversity and resilience. Resilience means specifically that they can handle disturbance like changing climates, cold spells, and heat domes, etc. So we know native plants have evolved for thousands of years to thrive in the local climate and soil conditions. Therefore, they are excellent choices to handle our climate changes that are occurring presently. Secondly, they have involved with the local wildlife, so they're ideal for providing food, shelter, and nesting sites for pollinators and other animals. So because of that, it's important that all of us, when we do gardening, is to increase the amount of native species. Here in the Northwest, we take pride in having the latest cultivar bred by humans, and do not think of their ecological requirements, meaning how well do they support pollinators and wildlife. So if we increase native species, we can restore these native habitats that support natural processes and contribute to long-term stability. These are just a couple of examples. We have many different, maybe 50 or so different types of penstemons. This is one I really like, Caldwell's penstemon, native to the Northwest. It blooms during the summer with beautiful blooms that are attractive to pollinators, but it also has a mat forming quality that minimizes weed germination and spread. So if you use ground covers that minimize weeds, that goes a long way in reducing your maintenance time. Here's another one, sulfur buckwheat, has beautiful yellow flowers in summer, very drought tolerant, and you can see a pollinator there already jumping on and getting its nectar. Near natives can expand the palette. Now, near natives, I consider near natives if you use a plant that's native, say, to Oregon or California. Well, why select it from Oregon or California? Because those plants are used to hotter weather. And since our summers are getting warmer, they do a good job. And they also are used to our Mediterranean climate because they're also in the Mediterranean climate. So they can handle wetter winters and dry summers. Just some examples, manzanitas. We grow many different types of manzanitas. We do have some native here, but there are many different attractive manzanitas from California, and this is one of the ones that does the best in the Pacific Northwest. It's called Howard McMinn. Has beautiful, gorgeous cinnamon red bark and very attractive flowers that occur in late winter at a time when few other plants are flowering. So it's very useful for early pollinators. Another one is California fuchsia, native to California, has a beautiful tubular flower that's very attractive to hummingbirds. And it blooms in late summer and fall, again at a time when many other flowers are not blooming. So it's very useful for our pollinators in the later season. Now, the last choice in our plant palette is non-natives. Now, they give us a lot of ornamental diversity. They're generally chosen because they may have a beautiful form, special color, seasonal interest, etc. And we like to add beauty to our garden. And in the process, if they're properly chosen, they can extend bloom windows. So if you have a non-native that blooms late in the fall, or maybe like a heath that blooms in the wintertime for pollinators, that would be beneficial. So we want to have a beautiful garden and can use natives, but we don't want to lose ecological balance and make sure they support our wildlife and pollinators. Now, to do that, we need very specific criteria. So number one is to ensure if it's non-native, is it non-invasive? Does it spread rapidly and compromise or disrupt our native ecosystem? Secondly, you want it to provide some benefits or services. What does it do for your garden? Is it serving as erosion control? Is it to contribute something for pollinators or wild animals? Does it enhance the soil? There are some plants like manzanita, ceanothus, many others, coneflowers, that fix nitrogen. And they take the nitrogen from the air and make it in nitrates that plants can use. And this significantly improves soil fertility. And then the other question, of course, are they climate adapted? Can they handle the heat waves and the cold spells we have today? And then you would like to pick plants that require minimal water and minimal fertilization. And finally, you want to ask yourself, does this plant support wildlife and pollinators? Okay, here's some examples. Autumn sages. There are many sages available today that are quite drought tolerant in the summer and are long blooming. And this is just one example. Another one is catmint. Your cat might like it also. It's called Walker's Low, and it's long blooming throughout the summer. And this is a hardy geranium called Geranium mycorrhizae. It's a perfect plant for partial shade, and it does also a great job of forming mats that minimize regermination and spread. And finally, we have a herb, golden oregano, facing south along East 31st as you come in, that does a great job on this very hot bank in the summertime. So the bottom line is you want to lead with ecology when choosing plants, which means that they fit into the ecosystem and they support the ecosystem rather than disrupt it. So you can add near and non-natives that provide services and that are non-invasive, and also provide essential resources for pollinators, birds, and other wildlife. Now, why are pollinators important? Well, we all know that 3/4 of all flowering plants worldwide depend upon pollinators. to fertilize them. And without pollinators, we wouldn't be here today. We would not survive. We need these plants to provide all their benefits. Secondly, about 35% of global food production depend upon pollinators. So obviously, we know now, even in our apple crop, they have to ship bees around because we don't have enough pollinators for some of our orchids or orchards in eastern Washington. And we know that the populations of our pollinators are significantly declining in the last couple of decades, primarily due to habitat loss and climate stress and other factors. But all pollinators are not the same. Some are specialists. Specialist means that they depend upon only one plant or very closely related plants. So in order to support these specialists, native plants are best because they have involved with the specialist organisms. That's a very important issue. So if you have no native plants, then you will have, the specialists will have a problem in your garden. So to summarize, we need pollinators and wildlife, and gardens play a very central role. Our gardens, urban gardens particularly, are very important now to support the declining pollinators and the impact on wildlife. So we need a diverse mix of plants that form overlapping bloom time throughout the entire season. And to make it readily accessible, they should be planted in drifts, and you ideally have a water source, and you need stems, hollow stems or pithy stems, because those are used for nesting and overwintering. So you don't want to cut all your flowers down with no stems, because these are needed in the wintertime for your beneficial pollinators to nest and overwinter, particularly your native bees like the mason bees. There's one example. So we have to think beyond flowers for beauty or show. We have to ask ourselves, do the flowers provide a benefit for the pollinators and the important other beneficial insects? Do they provide shelter and nesting? As one example, is some people like to have double flowers. Most double flowers do not provide adequate pollen or nectar to pollinators. So if you want to have an ecologically rich garden, do not plant double flowers. There are many, many beautiful flowers using species without selecting cultivars or double flowers available today. Now, so it makes a difference whether you choose species versus cultivars. Species have genetic diversity, and they have, of course, they have developed along with wildlife, so they're beneficial for pollinators and wildlife. While cultivars are picked for specific ornamental traits, maybe for a specific flower, maybe for uniform size and shape, but they may not be advantageous to a pollinator. So let's say a pollinator's love a beautiful white flower, and they develop a cultivar that's purple. You say, oh, that's wonderful. I'll use the purple cultivar, but it may be useless to the pollinator. So we have to think about that realistically. We want to help the ecological properties of the garden. And so species provide the ecological health and resilience to the garden. While cultivars can add ornamental variety, but they risk ecological trade-offs. So we have to consider that. So now we're going to very quickly go to planting basics. You now chosen the right plant, you know the right place to put it, but you got to plant it properly. You don't just stick it in a hole. So very briefly, you want to not plant it too deep. I know I gave a class for the city of Bremerton to show them how the employees should be planting their street trees. So the key point is not to plant it too deep. That's why you only dig the hole the size of the root ball. If you dig it too deep, then it may sink and you end up a plant with too deep, and overall will have poor health in the long run. So you want to have the root flare, which is the point at which the roots meet the trunk, slightly above ground level. And then you want to backfill with local soil. So the feeder roots are directly associated with the local soil. And another thing is you don't want to add compost or other amenities generally to your planting hole. This is an old idea, and it's not, over the long run, it's not beneficial. However, you can add mycorrhizae, which is a symbiotic fungus that greatly enhances the nutrient water uptake of plants and also establishes a great drought tolerance for your plant. So that could be added to the planting hole. It's also important for the first few years is to water your plants deeply and infrequently, and then maybe mulch them to minimize water loss. And we always plant almost all our plants at Vista Gardens in the fall because it's a cool time, and then you don't have to water the plants once the rains come in the fall, and the plants have a time to establish good roots before the dry summer arrives in the spring. Now, we want to talk briefly about the impact of climate change on gardens. Can everybody hear me okay? All right. So with warming temperatures, and increased carbon dioxide levels, the invasives are more readily spread. And so we have to be very careful that we don't have plants that are spreading and become invasive. We have phenology shifts. What does this mean? That means there's a match between the flower bloom time and the pollinators and the insects that depend upon this flower. And so that can create great difficulties. And then, of course, we're faced with both heat and drought stress as in our drier summers. So we have to manage it proactively. And the most important thing is if we identify a plant as being too aggressive, take it out right away. And to control weeds, the key thing is to remove them before they go to seed. Now we're just going to go through the different plants that we plant in Vista Gardens. We like conifers. We have about 450 different conifers in Vista Gardens alone. Well, why do we like conifers? Well, number one, most of them are quite drought tolerant. They're adaptable. They're long-lived. Most of the conifers that you plant today will outlive you, even if you're a youngster. They provide year-round ecological services and food and shelter for wildlife and other animals. And so they also provide us with four-season interest. So these are just one example. You see the powder blue conifer on the island in the center there, a beautiful form that grows about 4 inches per year. Does not require any supplemental water or pruning. Another one of my favorite, is Cedar of Lebanon Green Prince, grows about 4 inches per year. This one here is probably nearly 40 years old. And here's a beautiful deodar cedar growing about 4 or 6 inches a year that has very white colored needles initially in spring, a beautiful form. And now we want to go to broadleaf trees. They also provide environmental services. Trees are very important in our environment because they play the biggest role in moderating our temperatures. Our temperatures in the Lentz Garden, which is a woodland, and our woodland in back of Vista Gardens is 5 to 10 degrees cooler than the other part of the garden. So they really play an important role. The other thing that I didn't mention, conifers remove pollutants. They play a major role in removing pollutants year round. And they, of course, when we have our rains, they're very good at slowing the rain and the stormwater that comes down. And broadleaf trees also play an important role, and they complement conifers and add seasonal interest. Here's just one example, Judas tree. It's more like a large shrub or a small tree, and it has beautiful white flowers coming directly out on the stem. It's really stunning. And it's extremely drought and pest disease resistant. Another one I like, the smoke tree, golden spirit, which has these light, puffy, smoke-like plumes, and also attract yellow foliage that turns red in the fall. And crab apples do very well here in the Northwest. They're nice small trees. You don't need a lot of space. This is just one example of royal rainpops. So we want to diversify plantings with conifers and broadleaf trees because they provide us with climate resilience. They live a long time and they're tough and can generally handle the cold and wet and the dry spells. They are ecologically supportive, and I think they're visually attractive, particularly if they're appropriately selected. But we also need shrubs. They certainly also play an important role in our environment. They can enhance the urban resilience, provide shade and cooling, offer habitat and food for wildlife and pollinators, and help improve air and water quality as an example. Here's an example of a Cornish heath. I like this. It's one of the most drought-tolerant ericas we have, called heaths in the heather family, with very interesting flower that bloom in late summer and fall when many other plants are not flowering. And then we have this blue mist shrub, again, a very drought-tolerant shrub that blooms late in the summer, and you can see something coming after it already. Lots of nectar and pollen available. Then we have the Mexican orange, Choicia tornata, that's native to Mexico, has a beautiful, sweet, fragrant flower. Very drought-tolerant, tough shrub that does very well here. So, but we don't want to end there. Perennials can offer a lot to gardens. They're adaptable, if properly selected to climate stress. They definitely play an important role in supporting pollinators and are beneficial insects and birds. They help stabilize soil and provide us with a lot of color, texture, and vital habitat. This is some of my favorites is the curlicue sage, which is an artemisia that provides very interesting texture and extremely drought tolerant. This can be placed on our southwest hillside and never needs supplemental water. Here's great creeping germander, comes from the Mediterranean region, actually an island off of the east coast of Spain, but it does very well here and does not require any supplemental water once established. Another one is from Turkey, is Veronica, is also an excellent, interesting, low-growing, spreading perennial. So we can choose a group of plants, native, near native, or non-native, as long as they're drought tolerant and support wildlife perennials and site for water in need, can improve the ecosystem we have today. So from knowledge to action, this is the most important part. And what do we do with this knowledge once we know that? So we have the power to conserve, restore, and enhance and sustainably manage our local urban system. It just takes knowledge and correct action. If we embrace this new aesthetic, one that values natural and wild elements, we can allow certain areas to grow more freely, excuse me, and express their ecological richness. If we shift from seeing our gardens and parks not as manicured spaces, but recognize them as dynamic living systems. That's what we need to do. Then they will become more resilient and be appropriate for our wildlife and pollinators. But this transformation begins with mindful, specific choices. So we have to understand the impact of our gardening selections. We need to prioritize native plants and then also consider locally adapted plants, but above all, avoid invasive species. So every decision we make, no matter how small, helps shape the health of our shared environment. If we plan to work with nature rather than against it, we can create urban gardens and spaces that sustain biodiversity, foster resilience, And we connect us with the living world around us. You can start today by selecting and growing more native plants, or you may want to have a water-wise garden. It's really up to you. But every small action, if we multiply that across our community, we can create resilient landscapes that our future depends upon. Thank you for listening. Now, I'd like to go to one more slide. We can skip this. You have a book coming out, and one problem with gardening books is they don't provide you, very few of them provide you with the cultural requirements of the plants. And oftentimes it's hard to obtain this from the nurseries that are here today. So this book provides that specific information for hundreds and hundreds of plants that have been tested and proving to work well in Vista Gardens here in Bremerton. Okay, now let's open it up for questions. You're going to repeat. Back to you.
So, first of all, I want to thank you very, very much.
Okay.
Second of all, I want to tell you, it's going to be posted on the web. Did you all try to write down all the species? And it was really hard to get them all straight. This whole talk will be posted on our website. For that, I'm very grateful that you let us do that.
Okay. Yeah.
And so what Bobby will now repeat your questions so that the Zoom audience can hear them. And I will read from the chat. So I'm telling also for the chat people, they can submit their questions. And
So do we have any questions? So the question was, this young woman in the audience has a home where whoever built it put down no barrier for weeds or anything and used a lot of river rock all over the land there.
Yeah.
So what does she do with that sort of rocky space?
Well, the first question is, what do you want to end up with? You want to plant gardens, plant plants in there?
So essentially, she has beautiful conifers in one area and hydrangeas in the other, and rocks and weeds in the middle. And she'd rather not lift all the rocks by hand.
Okay, well, river rock actually is very useful in the environment. So you could use those, you remove them to decide on which specific areas of your garden you will keep the river rocks. And so you remove this part, and then where they're removed, then you remove the weeds and you can plant. How large is your garden? This area? Are you here in Bremerton? Where is she?
So it's about 30 feet long and 5 feet wide. So it's just a strip of land in her garden.
Oh.
So the situation involves a terraced landscape with a drain field and then some terracing and then this river rock area. So I think that the question is, how do you get rid of the weeds and make use of that land and what plants? And so I'm just going to add, it's a difficult question without seeing the site.
Yeah, where you want to remove the rocks to where you would like them if you want to plant in those areas. And there are several approaches for getting rid of weeds. One is solarization, where you put down plastic and leave it there for 4 or 5 months, and that will kill all the weeds and the weed seeds, which is very important. The alternative is put something down and then put 5 or 6 inches of mulch and leave that for many months. And then you plant in that after you go through this process. So those are 2 approaches. If it's just, yes.
Okay.
So the weeds themselves are not the problem, it's the weed seeds that's the problem. Yes.
So the question is, her sister lives in Seattle and has a $400 a month water bill. Why? Now, we don't know her other habits in the house.
Does she have a lot of lawn?
What?
Does she water the lawn?
She does not water the lawn. Is it an average neighborhood?
Average.
Right.
Well, if you select drought tolerant plants, once they're established, you don't need to water at all. Most trees and shrubs don't need any watering if they're properly selected here.
What?
Drought tolerant plants, you select them, drought tolerant plants, and there are many, many of the beautiful plants available today. And so, and the other thing is, if you want plants that require watering, you should put them all in one place. That's the hydrozone concept. So those two approaches should you definitely conserve water.
And maybe a plumber should see if she has a leak. We have a question from the home audience.
They want to know, have the last 2 summers been different from the usual one? Because this person is losing some more plants than they ever have before.
The answer is yes. The short answer is yes. Yeah, we're growing, you can grow figs, we can grow oranges and other plants that we wouldn't grow before 2010 because we are having over the average warmer temperatures and particularly warmer at night. We're noted for having cool nights, but we've had a lot of nights where we're not getting below 60. Now we are getting there, but in 20 years ago, that wasn't the case. We would have easily summer temperatures at night in the 50s. So the overall temperature are definitely getting warmer and the period of the summer has extended. Look how dry our September is now. We've had very, very little rain. And that was not typical 10 years ago. So yes, it is changing. It's stressing the plants more. And I think that's contributing.
And so plant choices for the future.
Yeah, so you have, and the other problem is that most people don't pay much attention to their own conditions. In other words, some plants don't like planted in clay, other plants don't like planted in sand. So what kind of soil do I have? So a lot of the people who go to master gardener clinics, and I went through their program, is because they are planting the wrong plant in the wrong place. And so that creates health problems for that plant and more stress. And they're going to be more susceptible to the changing climate and the drier summers.
Thank you very much for that. We have 2 more questions here.
Okay.
Yeah, 2 more online and then we'll do 1 more here. Yeah.
How do you tell a cultivar versus the species?
Yes. Okay, that's a good question. Generally, if you have a genus or species, you have a Latin name for the genus, Latin name for species. The cultivar name is always in quotation marks and capitalized. So if they have a name, they would say this is on the label, it would say it will be capitalized with the cultivar with single quotation marks. So if it has single quotation marks, it's a cultivar.
And
but not all cultivars are equal. So there are shrubs, for example, that are cultivars, but there are selected cultivars, they're not bred. And that means they still have seeds that are not clones. A lot of the cultivars are clones, and therefore they're bred and they're all going to be identical. And they're less likely than they're cloned for beauty and not cloned or ask the question whether they're more beneficial. There are some cultivars that are actually more beneficial than a native species. So there are always exceptions, but in generally, cultivars don't have the genetic diversity that species do, and they won't have the single quotation marks on the label. Does that answer your question?
Well, that's not her question. That was a question online. We have 1 more from
online
viewer.
Okay.
how much, you said that we should have our soil tested.
Yes.
So how many samples should we submit? Because there's different microclimates.
Absolutely. That's a very good question.
How much should it cost?
Well, I haven't done it recently, but the cost is generally nominal. I know there's a very good place in Oregon that does it. In King County, they used to do it for free, actually. So, it used to be around $20, $25. It may be a little more now. What was the other question besides the cost?
Well,
How do they?
Oh, samples.
In what areas?
You need to sample in different areas of your garden. And so, and you take multiple samples from the same area. I mean, if you go to my current book, that's on the table, it goes through and explains exactly. But generally, if you have a professional place doing it, they will give you specific instructions. So you take an area of about 6 inches in diameter and you dig it about 8 inches deep and you take a slice of that. And as one sample, and then you take other samples from that location, and then you go to another location and mark that and take a few samples. It depends upon how diverse is your yard, but you always want to take it in different locations because it could be quite variable depending upon what happened in the past.
So the more variation to the landscape, the more
Right.
samples.
But that's important that you take multiple samples from different regions and then you send those in. But all professional testers will give you very specific instructions on how many samples they want and in the different locations.
All right, and question here, please. So the question, she has a drought tolerant area of her garden. She has ceanothus and hebes and some other drought tolerant plants, but she also has euphorbia, which is taking over. So how shall we warn her to deal with that?
It's getting too big.
The euphorbia is spreading, aggressive.
Well, number one, some euphorbias you should not plant because they are too aggressive. We have Euphorbia fence ruby on our island, one of our islands in our 3 islands. And we don't recommend it for gardeners because it's too aggressive. In that particular case, it's surrounded by rock. But there are euphorbias that are too aggressive and should not be planted. I would remove your euphorbia. If you like euphorbia, there are other euphorbias you can choose that have been demonstrated not to be so aggressive.
And one warning about removing it, the sap, don't get it in your eyes.
Right. Yes. Yeah, they do have a toxic sap. And unfortunately, I was picking that euphorbia I talked about with my bare hands and ended up in an emergency with tremendous pain in my eyes and had abrasions in both eyes. So be careful with euphorbia. Wear gloves, which I like to have my fingers in the dirt. But I suggest wear gloves when you pull those euphorbia out. Okay.
Other questions? Yes, sir. So edible landscaping. The question is, do you have recommendations for edible plants that will provide?
Well, I think it's good to have not just the normal vegetables, etc., but have berry scrubs and perennials like asparagus, perennial fruit and vegetables is a low maintenance, low carbon process compared to all the extra work you got to do to grow the normal vegetables. So I would certainly point to that as the first approach, is to try to pick out some berry plants, blueberries, and there are many different berries, native berries or not even not native berries you can grow, and some perennial vegetables is a good approach to have low maintenance and low carbon footprint. And then there are other vegetables depending upon what you prefer, obviously. I mean, I was brought up in a family with always a large vegetable garden where all our winter vegetables and fruit was obtained in the summertime. And so it basically provided all the fruit and vegetables for the entire year. But I think if you have a small plot, you need to be more selective. And I would strongly suggest to prioritize perennial vegetables and shrubs first, and then go to the few other vegetables.
Yes. So the question is about huckleberries. When she goes hiking in the Cascades, the huckleberries are full of fruit and flower and not locally. What's going on with the huckleberries locally? They're not flowering or fruiting in the parks.
Well, the huckleberries in the wild environment are happier, obviously. I think it depends upon a lot of our urban soils are not native soils. And there are, if you don't have a native soil, let's say your property is on fill or something like that, your huckleberry is not going to do well there. So I think part of it definitely relates to the nature of the soil in the urban environment is not the same as it is in the wild environment. And that definitely makes a difference. We know, fortunately, I think that my current location at Vista Gardens was a forest for most of the time. And so a good part of it has still excellent native soil. But most areas, the soil is no longer native and not ideal for native plants. Now you can improve your soil to make it more acceptable for the huckleberry, but that's a technical process. You'd have to have a clear understanding of differences. But I think soil differences are probably the major reason.
So the question is, do you have anything to say about deer?
I love deer. But is deer a problem? Yes, we had a lot of deer pressure in the garden, and so we eventually had to fence Vista Gardens. However, the redwood sanctuary was not fenced because we bought that in 2016 to save the large redwood. And so we planted plants that are deer resistant. And there are quite a few deer resistant shrubs and perennials. And I showed you a few today. So aromatic plants, like Walker's Low, I showed you today, is aromatic. They won't affect anything that's has a good smell to it. Generally, they avoid. So you want to plant deer-resistant shrubs and perennials in your garden if you have deer pressure. And we do cover that briefly in my other book. But there are sources that can help you select deer-resistant plants. And I could give you a long list. If you come visit the redwood sanctuary, all but two of the plants there are considered quite deer-resistant. Now, certain circumstances, depending upon the nature of the deer and how hungry they are and conditions, they will eat almost anything. But in general, in this environment, you can select plants that they will not bother. Obviously, they love roses, they love hostas, except for you don't plant those if you have a deer pressure. So you select plants that are deer resistant, and that's the way you solve the problem.
And I'll just add, if you can't make it to Vista Gardens in the near future, whether you're online or here, you can go to our website and visit the garden page. And you can see all the key plants that are used in each garden area. There are 15 garden areas. There's over 1,800 plants documented within the website. So you can go to that garden area and go, oh, this is the Redwood Sanctuary, or this is this garden, that garden, and go through all the plant selections John has made for Vista Gardens.
One more thing. So then what you're saying is that if you go to the redwood section, you will find a list of deer-resistant plants.
And drought tolerant.
Yes, but not all of them will be. There's a couple on there, which I can name right now, but because we now have fenced it, and that gave us the opportunity to plant something that was not. So there's a cistus there. It's Halineocistus Maris woods, which has a beautiful flower, but it's herbaceous, and the deer will, well, they don't destroy it, but they, eat off the flowers, and so it's not ideal. But most of the plants, I'd say over 90% of those plants, I think right now all but two are considered both very drought tolerant and deer resistant. It'll be a good starting point. I don't know.
Thank you again.
Thank you.